pursuing a career as an early childhood educator. Throughout the following slides, I will discuss aspects of being culturally responsive and aware as it applies to my future career goals. As a future early childhood educator, I expect to have a diverse group of students fill my classroom. These students will have different backgrounds, ethnicities, cultures, and experiences that will affect the type of learner that they are. Christy Lamb states that there are 7 different types of learners that include auditory, visual, verbal, logical, kinesthetic, social, and interpersonal learners. It is important that I get to learn which type of learner each of my students are so that way I can ensure that I am presenting the content in a way that will be easily understood and learned. When talking about hidden curriculum, it is defined by Great Schools Partnership as the unwritten, unofficial, and often unintended lessons, values, and perspectives that students learn in school. Throughout my classroom, I will encourage my students to participate in conversations relating to culture. These conversations will provide my students with the opportunity to learn about their classmates' cultures as well as teach others about their personal cultures. This will spark both intentional and unintentional learning that will go along with hidden curriculum. As a future early childhood educator, it is my job to create an environment that promotes and advances my students' development and learning. I want to create a safe, fun, and engaging learning environment that will get my students excited about learning. On top of that, I want to create a learning environment that allows for my students to work on all aspects of their life, meaning social, personal, and academic development. Caroline Waldman states that there are 4 main aspects that go into creating a successful learning environment. Those include safety, engagement, connectedness, and support. I will create a safe environment that will allow for my students to feel comfortable when speaking up in class or asking for help. I will allow for my students to have opportunities to engage with one another about the content being taught, in hopes that they will provide new perspectives to one another. When creating a learning environment for my students, it is important that I take into consideration the space and place of that learning environment. According to Zeki, schools are steering away from dark, dreary walls and incorporating a more light and open space for learning. These open concept classrooms promote collaborative learning among students, as well as allow for more student-driven education. The learning space that my students are in is crucial for their development. It is important that I fill my classroom with light and colorful visuals that will expand upon the information being taught, as well as organize my classroom in a way that promotes student collaboration and teamwork. Tippmann, 1994, writes that the materials provided in a classroom are what aids the students in their education. In regards to materials, students learn best when using materials that they are able to manipulate. As an early childhood educator, I will provide a variety of different materials for my students to choose from. An example of that can be the seating in my classroom. Although it seems small, the choice of a seating option will allow my students to choose which is best for them. This choice can help them focus on the material being taught. The materials I provide in my classroom will aid in the learning and development of my students, and I will provide many different options for materials for them to choose from. Amy Marco states that the achievement gap refers to a disparity of achievement between various student groups. This achievement gap is oftentimes seen between students that come from wealthier families and live in wealthier areas, and students that come from lower income families and who live in less affluent areas. It is important to understand that my students will be coming from different socioeconomic backgrounds. As a future early childhood educator, it is important that I provide all of my students with the same educational opportunities within the classroom. This allows for my students to receive an equal and high quality education, and I hope that it will help bridge the achievement gap. On top of providing an equal opportunity for education to all of my students, it is important that I fight for change to ensure that all students in the country receive an equal and high quality education. Cultural biases are formed by incorrect and inaccurate information in regards to culture. These cultural biases can be formed by preconceived judgments and stereotypes that fill an individual's brain. Conway 2006 states that the historical events that are taught are oftentimes myths or incorrect information that has been presented to students for many years. As a future early childhood educator, it is important that I provide my students with accurate information in regards to historical events and cultures. This information will allow for them to form their own opinions based on the information presented. As a future early childhood educator, I feel that it is my job to create an environment that allows for my students to feel comfortable enough to express their cultures, as well as being open to learn about the many different cultures that fill society. Like previously stated, I will provide accurate information regarding culture. This will hopefully prevent any biases to form within my classroom towards other cultures. In addition, Marcos 2017 writes, "The people who are most able to achieve competency in these skills will be able to earn the full rewards of society." As an educator, I aim to provide my students with the necessary information about different cultures that will allow for them to have skills to work effectively throughout society. As an educator, it is my job to ensure that there are no negative biases or judgments within my classrooms. These judgments or opinions can prevent my students from getting along with one another, as well as prevent them from learning the content. To ensure that there are no biases on my end, I will provide all of my students with the same tests, assignments, educational opportunities, and feedback no matter what their cultural background is. Marcos 2018 states that cultural conflict is a type of conflict that occurs when different cultural norms clash. As a future early childhood educator, it is my job that I take the time to learn about the individual cultures that fill my classroom. This will allow me to understand the differences and similarities between these cultures, as well as do my best to prevent any culture conflicts within my classroom. I will encourage my students to learn about other cultures, which will allow for them to form their own opinions about these cultures. Pop culture can be incorporated into lessons to provide students with important information, but in a more fun and engaging way. One way that I can incorporate pop culture into my classroom is by using comic strips or comic books. Fishman states that although comics are usually viewed as presenting information in a fun and engaging way, there is always a message behind the information being discussed. I hope to use comics to provide my students with a different means of learning information, as well as I hope to engage them in the content being presented. On top of that, pop culture can be used as a way for students to compare the information they learn in class to different TV shows, movies, or podcasts they see. Marcos 2018 writes, "The topics from our class apply to many scenarios we can see in our daily lives, as well as scenes portrayed in the media. Students can take the information they learn in class and apply it to real-life examples they see through media, films, and television." As a future early childhood educator, I feel that the use of pop culture and media in the classroom is a great way to expand upon the information being discussed. It will create a fun and engaging lesson that will excite my students about learning. As a future educator, it is important that I thoroughly examine the rituals of my school's culture, as children spend a majority of their time at school. Marcos 2018 writes, "As such a large part of their lives, even the small pieces of everyday schooling needs to be critically examined. Through analyzing school rituals, it will be able to tell me, as an educator, what truly occurs throughout the school. On top of that, I will be able to learn my students' recurring behaviors. This will help me understand them as a learner and allow for me to adapt my teaching style for the betterment of my students. I will also be able to see what students choose to do in their free time, lunchtime, or in between classes. I will also be able to note which students do not necessarily fit in. I will be able to take this information with me into my classroom and ensure that all students are working together and no student is left out." As an educator, I feel that it is important to practice culturally responsive teaching to ensure that my students learn positive information in regards to culture. To start, it is crucial that I understand the different cultures and backgrounds of my students, as that impacts the learning styles of them. Marcos 2018 writes, "Funds of knowledge" refers to the background knowledge that each student brings into the learning environment. By learning this information about my students, I will be able to provide them with the accurate information about their culture. Due to the fact that each of my students will have different backgrounds and cultures, I will be able to use information about all of my students to teach them about the varying cultures that fill society. On top of that, this information sparks cultural conversations amongst my students and allows for them to connect with each other. Bennett 2018 writes, Through understanding various cultures and social groups, students are able to make connections from their own lives to the lives of their peers. There are a multitude of ways that I will teach with this approach. The first step is to educate myself about my students as well as their cultural backgrounds. Gay, 2002, writes, "We can't teach what we don't know," page 106. This is a true statement, as I will not be able to teach my students about different cultures if I am not educated on them. I will be able to encourage cultural conversations and support cultural diversity within my classroom. These are a few ways that I will implement into my classroom to ensure that I am practicing culturally responsive teaching. This concludes my presentation. Thank you for your time.